Hello, everyone, and welcome to our talk about Is Programmatic Job Posting the Future? I'm Ian Moss. I'm part of the marketing team here at Adzuna, and I'd just like to introduce Leah Daniels from Appcast.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Leah Daniels, and I run strategy for Appcast. For those of you who don't know, Appcast is a programmatic platform based out of the U.S., although we do operate a number of places globally, including the U.K. And I think what's interesting for us for today is that Appcast is one of the largest platforms in terms of the number of employers that we work with, also in terms of the amount of data that we get to process, all of which will become relevant through our conversations today.
Thanks, Leah. And if you haven't come across Adzuna either, we're a quality-obsessed job search engine that helps candidates zero in on the right role, and we're helping in-house recruiters get the right people seeing and applying for your jobs. Much like Appcast, we see loads of jobs, so we see pretty much every job in the UK in one form or another. So we have tons of job market data that we're releasing regularly. But we're not here for a sales pitch. Instead, we wanted to talk about programmatic job posting. Now, this is obviously something that's gained a lot of traction in the US and is a little bit behind here in the UK. So that's why we wanted to get Leah on to talk, because Appcast has been doing such amazing things. So I just want to quickly run through the agenda of what we're going to talk about. So we're going to start with how job posting has been disrupted throughout history, an introduction to programmatic job posting, how you should approach programmatic posting, and how to get the best out of your suppliers. And then at the end of this, we'll then hopefully answer the question, is it the future? So with that in mind, I'm just going to pass straight over to Leah, and she can lead us off.
Awesome, thank you. So although I'm sure all of you guys are familiar with this history of the world part one here, we always like to talk about how the world has been disrupted in these different points in time. And so for many of you who've been in recruiting for longer than they want to admit to, you may recall the old school newspaper approach to finding candidates, which interestingly in some places still is effective. And we still see some of that. It's also that sign in the window approach. But when you were doing the newspaper approach, you were really paying for your job postings in a very specific way. You paid per word. In 1998, our friends at Monster launched the Monster board, and they took this construct of the newspaper and tried to lift and shift it over to the internet. It created a whole bunch of different opportunities that didn't exist previously. So for example, all of a sudden you could reach everybody, not just your local community. So your one posting really had a much broader reach. But along with that came sort of some risk that felt a little different. Even though in a newspaper, you couldn't control whether or not somebody saw your ad or if they responded. In the internet, you should really not see that, but you did, right? You sort of had this, maybe it worked, maybe it didn't approach to advertising your job. But you no longer had that limitation of words. And so there were some differences that happened. In 2005, my friends at Indeed, again, disrupted the market, and we saw them introduce this concept of pay-per-click. And what they went to market with, which was really smart, was, hey, you should only pay if you actually get something out of what you paid for, right? You shouldn't be paying for a posting that got 0 views and 0 clicks and 0 applications. And now, as we're moving into today, we're starting to see things change again. Now, I often say that the recruiting world was paved in gold by the marketing folks ahead of us, which is why I'm excited to present with Ian today. Marketing has been doing a lot with monetizing and making pay-per-click work in better ways through this idea of programmatic. And so we're starting to see how that might work here in the recruiting space. So what is this programmatic thing? I keep saying it, but what is it? So at its core, programmatic is data, software, math, really against an outcome, right? Programmatic only works if you know where you're headed. One of the things that's a little bit misaligned in the market is that as an employer, as a company, you're not looking to buy postings. Like, you buy postings because that's what job boards sell, not because that's what you actually want to buy. You buy clicks, not because you want to buy clicks, but because that's what job boards sell. What you really want are hires. Or maybe, if we go back a little bit, qualified applicants, because I've yet to find too many companies who are excited about the first applicant, and that's enough, right? You always want more than one. So really, we're looking for qualified applicants. And software which we call programmatic, is a process with technology that allows us to hone in on that particular goal and help you get to it as efficiently as possible. In the back of all of this, it's really a software that puts rules, controls, guide rails up to help achieve that goal. And you do that through lots of different processes and technologies. So the big question, will it help me? Does it work? So programmatic actually has lots of little outputs along with these big ones I just mentioned. So one of the things that probably baffles you every day is, what's the right click price or applicant price or higher I should be paying in order to get this person into the door? The reality is not all candidates are equal in terms of their cost to acquire. And you probably know this. You've got entry-level positions that are probably easy to fill. And you also have some really difficult, maybe data scientist position or truck drivers here in the US, very challenging. And they cost a lot more money for you to acquire these people. But what is the right price? How do you figure that out? Well, programmatic takes all the data inputs, not just what's happening in your own little world, but also in the broader market, and says, all right, what is the actual price right now? What's the going rate? What's supply and demand look like? And what's the output look like on the other side? So there's one little thing it can help you with. Another thing is just providing you better data for your own sort of business process and how and where your opportunities are to improve. For example, we talk a lot about apply rates. Apply rates are how many clicks does it take to actually get a human to put their name in and hit that apply button at the very end of your process and you get that thank you page. For some companies, it takes 100 clicks to get one person. Some companies, it takes 100 clicks to get 5. And some companies, it takes 100 clicks to get 10. Well, what that means is that company that 100 clicks turns to 10 is 10 times more efficient. It costs them 10 times less, that's another way to think about it, than the company that 100 to 1. So if you understand your apply rate and you understand where you could improve, you can actually have significant cost savings for your business by simply changing your process internally. And the data that these programmatic platforms have can help you do that. You can also do things like zone in on what qualified looks like and try to help you find better qualified candidates. And really, it's about optimization at the end of the day. How do we find all these little opportunities and bring them all together to get you the most number of candidates who are the most qualified as efficiently as possible? So the next question we often get is, will this work for me? Is this programmatic thing good for my business? And the answer is, it's not that simple. It does depend a little bit about what your business looks like. So I often say it's not worth programmaticing one job. So what do I mean by that? Well, programmatic in some ways is a little bit of rob Peter to pay Paul. What that means is you may have certain positions that are just squandering your budget. So for example, if you have some easy to fill positions, you may find that you get hundreds and hundreds of applicants that you don't actually need. Maybe 30 would do. And so programmatic technology will say, oh, stop spending money there. Take that budget, lift and shift it over here to these harder to fill positions like data scientists or perhaps a nurse position. These are companies that we often call house on fire, where you're very reactive. You're running at lots of different kinds of jobs. Everything's a challenge today because everything's new and different. Or sometimes we call it whack-a-mole jobs, right? Whichever one is screaming the loudest is the one you're focused on today. But if you have some semblance of volume, not a ton, but some, this is where you can really get efficiencies because the system will find you the right price and reallocate budget appropriately where you need to find it. Another place that we see high efficiencies come out of it is actually what we call high volume roles. Now, I'm using 3 years of sales experience here, which is very common. We see that for organizations that need lots of salespeople, but this is also true for warehouse positions. It's true for retail. It's true for lots of different types of companies where the position is the same. The location may matter though, and location data is really important because it costs different amounts to hire people in different locations. I mean, just take the UK, for example, right? We know that London is different than Brighton, for example, right? It's just going to cost a different amount to attract talent. And programmatic platforms get really, really efficient at finding a single profile and just having the variation around the location. So you pay the exact amount you should in that particular location for that kind of position. Another really good example are harder to fill positions. So we're often looking at the healthcare industry when we talk about this, but here in the US, truckers are another great example, warehouse workers. There's a lot of different harder to fill positions out in the market. And it's really tough to keep up to date on what these kinds of people cost to acquire. It's just a really challenging thing to do. And so being able to work with a partner who's got a vision of the entire market and can really help you hone in on how to win each of these particular candidates out in the market and get them to be interested in your job versus someone else's is really a good value for the programmatic platforms. All right, so how do you do all of this? And how do you do it with lots of sources? So one of the biggest challenges in the market is when you're looking for candidates, you don't really know where they're going to be when you want to find them. They might be on one job site, they might be in their email, they might actually respond to a Google AdWords. You don't really know where candidates are going to be. So you need to manage lots of sources, but that has another danger level to it, right? The more sources you add into the mix, the more likely you sort of run into that problem we were mentioning before, which is those hundreds of candidates you don't want. So it's a balance, right? You want to both expand out your reach of who you're looking for, but create those guide rails and those rules that will stop you from spending money in places that isn't good for your business. So at the core of all of the programmatic pieces, it's really about that control and creating a set of controls that allow you to dictate out what efficiency looks like for your business, and then let the platform automate the rest of it to make it efficient for you, both in time and in your cost of investment.
Thanks, Leah. So I think it's back over to me now. So in terms of what we talk about when we talk about programmatic, and we want to talk about how you can approach this and certainly how you can deal with suppliers, one of the things that to sort of bear in mind as an in-house recruitment professional is that you've got to think about metrics. So we've talked a lot about costs and things like that, but what we obviously know about, what we really care about, in fact, is the quality of the hires and the quality of the candidates that we're getting through our system. Whereas what we're judged on as a business from our sort of executives and from people higher up is what our cost per hire is. It's often about the kind of brass tacks and hitting that sort of bottom dollar. Using dollar, bottom pound isn't really a phrase, but anyway. And so it's really about, dealing with the cost rather. It's really about sort of approaching these things. And obviously we think that's probably not the right way to approach these things necessarily. And it's about using kind of programmatic solutions as a way of trying to achieve both, trying to raise the quality of the hire and also lower the cost per hire ultimately. And it's possible you can do both. So this all comes sort of back to sort of marketing and advertising. And certainly as we were talking about some of these sort of pre-disruption moments with advertising, this quote from John Wanamaker, who's a guy who set up loads of retail stores over in the US, really rings true and is one that Leah and I both really enjoy, which is half the money I spend on advertising was wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half. Now, obviously that's very much an old school advertising thing where you would upload, you'd put an advert in and you wouldn't necessarily know which ones made sense, whether you put it in the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph, which ones are the ones actually driving customers to your to buy your product. And it's much the same thing with old school job posting. Whereas now with programmatic solutions and with these kind of measurable outcomes that we get, this has kind of really changed the dynamic of what we're able to do. And therefore it's beginning to change the dynamic of what you can do in terms of driving cost and quality and measuring these kind of things all the way through. And fundamentally, it's created a change to the vendor dynamic. Right now we have performance-based rules where you're measured, where a vendor is measured on results. So if you put you do an advertising campaign with one supplier and you get no results from it, you're not going to do anything more with it. And you can actually measure how much it's driven for you, how many clicks, how many applications it's driven, and then how many hires you made off the back of it. And because of that, we're then entering into sort of contractless relationships, certainly with a lot of vendors. And this is where sort of Adzuna comes in. Contractless relationships means that, we're fighting for your next budget by trying to do as well as we can with the current budget. If we're falling behind, if we're not able to kind of keep up with the thing with your performance, then we obviously we don't get the next budget. So that's what we're planning to do. And obviously that ultimately then leads to a situation where we want to be working together on long-term collaborative planning, or you want to be working with your vendors on this. So telling them what you're looking for, telling them what quality looks like, what kind of applications have actually driven, the hires and the shortlist or whatever it might be. And we'll talk about that in a second. And what that means is that ultimately the way you're going to be able to do that is by sharing this kind of performance data with your vendors, allowing them to sort of buy into your campaigns, allowing you to kind of buy into their strategy, and then allowing them to improve and allowing you to get better results in the long run. So we'll talk a little bit about how that works. So if we talk about, a mapped recruitment process in its kind of basic essence, we go from sort of clicks, as we've spoken about, all the way through to hires with various stages in between: applications, assessment, shortlist, interview, whatever it might be. This is obviously incredibly simplistic, but bear it in mind. And what this kind of means is that with vendors and suppliers, if you're only really giving them access to be able to see what clicks and applications they're driving, then that's what they're going to focus on. They're going to focus on getting you as many applications as they possibly can at the lowest possible cost. And if you're paying a fixed CPA, that's how they make their money. So they're going to be trying to do that. And if they don't have visibility into the other areas, they're not necessarily going to be driving you the right sort of applications through whatever means they have. So if this is all the vendor can see, that's all they can improve. And it's obviously not all applications are created equal. An application may be someone who doesn't even have the right to work in the UK. It may be someone who's certainly not qualified to work for that specific job. So not all applications are created equal, but if you're paying the same amount for each application, then that's what vendors will ultimately try and achieve. But where you can start buying this in and getting a kind of more cyclical process and a feedback loop built in is if you share this kind of information with the relevant vendors about what their applications have done. Now, obviously, it doesn't have to be personal information. There's a whole GDPR nightmare if you start introducing personal information. But if you start saying that application became a hire or became at least a shortlist candidate, became someone we invited to interview, that's a good application, then your vendors can focus on getting these quality applications, shortlisted candidates, and ultimately hires. So what it might mean is that you end up paying more per application, but you know that they're going to be better ones because they're finding better systems. And so we started, with these disruption tactics, going from sort of cost or pay per post rather, and we're at pay per click now, possibly pay per application. And we might at some point get to the point where sort of job boards and job aggregators like Adzuna start working towards cost per hires, or at least cost per qualified candidates. And so you may end up paying a slightly higher fee per thing, but the thing is much more valuable to you as a recruiter. And so, picking the approach that works for you. Now, there's certain businesses where actually just the sheer volume of applications is the thing that they need. That all they want is applications, and they don't really mind so much about how many they deal with. It's also worth bearing in mind, by the way, that if we focus only on the quality applications, then it means you have fewer and fewer applications that you have to deal with where you just have to instantly reject them, which is a potential, employer brand nightmare if you're rejecting people and you're not doing it correctly. But what this means is that the quality of hires ultimately will get better if we're focusing on those that reach further stages of the cycle. And ultimately what it means is the cost per hire will ultimately go down if the price points are there, and if you're able to kind of measure these things and challenge your suppliers to kind of hit these sorts of targets for you. But building a collaborative approach with technology, the technology exists to allow you to do this automatically, to build this kind of feedback loop in, and being able to track applications by source all the way through to hire will allow your vendors to be able to do this. And sharing relevant information back with your vendors. I use the word relevant to obviously, you don't want to give them the keys to the castle, but you need to give them enough information and enough honest information. You can't be holding people over a barrel and saying, you guys didn't do a good enough job for me. But if you can tell them, look, this is where your performance is at. This is what you've done for us. Can you improve yourself? Can you do better next month? And ultimately, you get into a sort of a long-term pattern where your vendors are doing the best they possibly can for you, and ultimately resulting in better quality, better hires, and a better outcome for you altogether. Obviously, this data exchange goes both ways, and this is just a little takeaway for you guys, a little sort of bonus slide. We had a look at some of the searches that are being done on adzuna.co.uk in terms of volume, and this is the kind of stuff that, as we're now in the sort of COVID situation and loads of people are working from home, is this is what people are actually searching for as job seekers or candidates. You know, we saw work from home have a massive spike, which has sort of receded slightly, but in the meantime, remote work has picked up. So those sort of keywords that you might be able to sort of weave in a bit more into your language as you write job adverts will help you get better candidates coming to you directly, and will help you, you know, find better candidates in better ways and be able to sort of write job ads in a way that's actually more impactful to the relevant people, and hopefully improve the kind of application rate that Leah was talking about. And so I think coming to the end of it, what the real question is kind of, what's the future? And I think where we're at today is this programmatic collaborative environment that where Leah was talking so much about the programmatic side of things and I was talking a bit about the collaborative thing, is that using this kind of technology and using the kind of using this data in order to create this sort of feedback loop with your vendors in order to drive better collaborative solutions and outcomes that benefit both of you, where they're able to deliver better quality applications for you at a better cost overall on a cost per hire basis, allowing you to stand up against your stand up to your executives and say, look, this is what we're able to achieve with this new technology.